If you suffer with insomnia, you're definitely not alone. 30% of adults experience insomnia symptoms every now and then, and 10% have chronic insomnia. But did you know that one very common sleep habit could be contributing to your insomnia? It might even be keeping you up right now. So keep watching to find out what it is and how you can change it. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, Today we are going to talk about this really interesting study which came out in 2021. The title of the paper is "This Nightly Habit Impairs Human Performance Next Day." And this is exactly what we're going to talk about today. One common nightly habit that when you do it before bed, it impairs your next day performance. So what is this habit? Well, in order to answer this question, I need to introduce you to something called the psychophysiologic insomnia model. So in our previous videos, we talked a lot about the relationship between the body and the mind, how our thoughts affect our feelings and how those feelings affect our behaviors. In the same way, our behaviors such as our thoughts also influence our body. That's why the mind and the body are interconnected. They influence each other. In the case of insomnia, the psychophysiologic insomnia model argues that insomnia doesn't just come from our brain. It's not like there's something wrong with our brain. Insomnia comes from the interaction between our body and our brain. If something is wrong with one or both, then insomnia will strike. Now let's look at this model in more detail. In the middle here, we have our brain. Around the brain, we have psychological factors such as stress, anxiety, worries, maladaptive thoughts, emotions, and beliefs about sleep. And these things influence our brain. Then, coming down from the brain, we have physiological arousal. That means our body responds to these thoughts and feelings. Our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure goes up, we start sweating, we get shivers, and all of these things happen because our brain tells our body to do so. But coming from the bottom here, we have environmental conditions. For example, noise, light, temperature, comfortable mattress, and all of these things influence our body directly. Now, our body, through the physiological arousal, influences back the environmental conditions. For example, if we sweat a lot, then the environmental conditions change. We might get colder. Or if we get shivers, we might actually feel warmer. So these two parts, the psychological and the physiological part, constantly interact with each other and influence each other. In addition, we also have our behaviors. So, for example, going to bed late, waking up early, napping, consuming caffeine, exercising. And all of these things influence our psychological and physiological state. Going back to the brain, we also have the neurochemical processes in the brain. So, for example, adenosine builds up in the brain and makes us sleepy. At the same time, when we sleep, our brain clears itself of these neurochemicals, and that promotes wakefulness. So all of these things together promote or impair our sleep. And according to the psychophysiologic insomnia model, when there's a mismatch between the psychological demands and the physiological capacity, then insomnia will strike. So now we are ready to look at the study. What does it say? Well, in this study, they looked at one of these behaviors, going to bed late. So they wanted to see what happens to our brain when we go to bed late. Is it just a small cost? Does it really matter? Or is it really harmful? In order to investigate this question, they recruited 18 healthy young adults. All participants were screened for psychiatric and medical disorders. None of them had any sleep disorders or taking any medication. In addition, they also excluded people who had irregular sleep schedules. So everyone had to have a regular sleep schedule in order to participate in the study. They asked participants to maintain their regular sleep schedule for 2 weeks prior to the experiment. And then they instructed them to go to bed 45 minutes later than usual for 2 consecutive nights. They told them to go to bed at their usual time on the 3rd night, and they monitored how much sleep they got. On average, participants slept 5 hours and 29 minutes on night 1, 5 hours and 6 minutes on night 2, and then 7 hours and 35 minutes on night 3. They used polysomnography to monitor their brain activity throughout the night, and they found that relative to the 3rd night, the first 2 nights they got less slow-wave sleep. Slow-wave sleep is one of the deepest stages of sleep. It's very hard to wake someone up during slow-wave sleep. It usually happens around the 3rd night of sleep. In addition, they found that on the first 2 nights, they spent less time in the transition stage, which is the stage right before the REM sleep. So overall, they got less deep sleep. Less deep sleep caused by going to bed later was associated with worse memory performance the following day. So overall, They tested many different aspects of memory, but what they found is that specifically spatial memory was affected the most. Spatial memory is the ability to remember where objects are located in space. For example, if you're replaying a video game and you need to remember where the items are hidden or where the enemy is coming from, that's spatial memory. Also, spatial memory is important in real-life situations, such as navigating through an airport or finding your way through a new city. Now, how did they test spatial memory? Well, they used a virtual reality task. They used a virtual reality headset, and they instructed participants to memorize the layout of a room. Then after they woke up, they had to accurately reproduce the layout of the room. They also did some other tasks, which measured other types of memory. However, only spatial memory was affected by the amount of sleep. In another experiment, they replicated these results. And in this experiment, they also found that working memory was impaired. Working memory is the ability to hold information in our mind and manipulate that information. So for example, if you're doing math in your head or trying to remember a phone number, that's working memory. Overall, they reported that going to bed just 45 minutes later than usual resulted in significant impairments in memory. So just think about what would happen if you consistently go to bed later than usual. You would experience these impairments in memory every single day. This study clearly shows that going to bed later has a significant cost. Even 45 minutes matters. So although you may not notice a difference in your mood or energy level that day, the next morning you will experience cognitive impairments. So let me ask you, how much time do you spend doom scrolling on your phone? You know, checking social media, watching random things, and suddenly you realize that you wasted half an hour. By the time you check your phone, you realize that you should go to bed, but now it's too late. So what can we do in order to avoid this? According to the psychophysiologic insomnia model, we need to keep our psychological and physiological states in balance. When one of them is too strong, then insomnia will strike. For example, if you feel anxious and stressed and worried, then your brain sends signals to your body to get you prepared for fight or flight. Your heart rate starts going up, your breathing becomes faster, and it's harder to sleep. On the other hand, if your body is over-aroused, for example, because of the environmental conditions, if it's too hot, if it's too cold, if there's too much noise, then that will also send signals to your brain and activate your brain. You won't be able to sleep either. So we need to find the sweet spot in the middle. If we are too aroused, we need to calm down. If we are not aroused enough, we need to get ourselves ready to go to bed. So what can we do? There are a few things we can do. First, we can practice good sleep hygiene. Good sleep hygiene means having a proper sleep schedule, going to bed and waking up at the same time every day, avoiding caffeine and large meals before bedtime, and making sure that our bedroom is dark and quiet. Another thing we can do is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBIT, which is a form of psychotherapy. It helps us identify and change thoughts and behaviors that contribute to insomnia. In addition, we can also use our environment to help us sleep. Using things such as white noise machines, blackout curtains, or even blue light filters on our phones can significantly improve our sleep quality. And finally, we can also take certain supplements, such as melatonin or magnesium. Melatonin is a hormone that regulates our sleep cycle. Magnesium is a mineral that relaxes our muscles and promotes calmness. So if you want to learn more about supplements, make sure to watch this video. And if you want to learn more about melatonin, make sure to watch this one.